Hey there, this is Rigaroga, and this is a wrap up after I've completed the final encounter in Star Wars role playing The Force Awakens beginner game. And having gone through the entire thing, I wanted to just sort of uh, kind of collect my thoughts about the experience of going through it for the first time, first ever Star Wars role playing from actually the first ever Star Wars role playing I've done. I didn't play the West End games or the Wizards of the Coast D20 version. So this is the first time I've ever actually played a tabletop role playing game set in the Star Wars intellectual property stuff. But this was my first of what I plan are several adventures going through the new Fantasy Flight material, and having just done that, I wanted to talk about some of the things that I had made notes for myself as I was going through. Um, First off, thing that I've noticed about the printed books, and this is true of all of the printed material for the Fantasy Flight Star Wars stuff that I've seen, it's hard to read. Look, I'm not super young anymore, and my eyes are not as great as they used to be. But man, the font choice is just it's abysmal for legibility in this beginner's game and also in the other materials. It's just it's in a light condensed font that's also sans serif. So not only is it really smooshed and thin, but there's actually no serifs to hint for your eyes, which is great online, but in print, they've made a really bad choice for the design of these books. Legibility is awful. As I was reading some of the actual printed material, I had to turn on all my lights and really look closely. I couldn't comfortably read it just as I would a regular book. Oh, as I was sitting there. So I think that the design could be better, especially that font choice. And as you look at some of the other materials from other RPGs and things like that, the legibility is pretty good on a lot of them. But this one in particular, I think they've made a bad choice. I think there could have been some better editing, both of this adventure as each of the encounters go. For example, one of the things that really struck me as I was reading through it, it kind of waffles on whether the attackers of the Starlight Wanderer are mercenaries or hired guns or actual members of the Struce clan. And the way that the player, I as a player, would interact with them would be different. If they're hired guns, I might try to buy them off or something like that, or convince them to do something different. As opposed to is if they are actual members of the Struce clan, that was kind of unclear. And there's also some weird stuff where the it seems like the story kind of changed as they were editing it, because it talks about the players confronting the Struce clan attackers before the first encounter, and that's in the text. It says, if the players decide to do this, but then it never actually happens that way. Um, so there's some weird stuff where it was kind of written maybe as an open adventure, but then it became railed. Or something, or something interesting happened that didn't quite get edited out, so that it was normalized across the entire thing. There's also some awkward phrasing that I ran into in the text, and I suspect, as I've been looking at some of the other materials and noticing some typos and editing issues, I can't help but wonder if that font choice actually made it really difficult to edit. You know, if they had distributed it as sort of PDFs and the last draft edit, it would have been really hard to go through and provide feedback on that book. As I've done some copy editing in the past, and volunteer to do that for other people, that I can tell you it would be really hard to focus on that text and provide good feedback. So maybe that has something to do with it, but there was some editing issues and awkward phrasing and some things that didn't quite work smoothly in the adventure. Another note that I made for myself is that there was some weird choice for the tokens. If you look at the unboxing video, and there's a whole bunch of tokens that never get used that are provided as part of the set, but there's also tokens that aren't there that should be. For example, one of the big encounters is involves TIE fighters and a Star Destroyer and the quad jumper, and none of those are provided. And I know that I think it's the Edge of the Empire, there are TIE fighters and a Millennium Falcon. So it's not that they didn't want to cannibalize their figurine market. It's just that for some reason they didn't even include. It's like people who made the tokens didn't really talk. They took assets that they could get from the movie and put those in. Like maybe they were contractually obligated to use particular imagery or something like that. But there was a bunch of stuff that was in the tokens that was from the movie, but not from the adventure. So they could have done the better job. I ended up using TIE fighters from Edge of the Empire beginner game, and I had to make my own quad jumper token, and I had to make my own Star Destroyer token for the playthrough. So that was kind of disappointing. Another thing that's interesting is all of the beginners games, they say that it includes everything you need to play, except for 2d10. There's percentile dice used in this game, and they don't include them. It's weird. I don't understand. I mean, they save a few pennies, and that adds up across, the entire publishing run. But still, come on. It's not everything you need to play. There's literally something that is required that isn't included. They assume that you have these 2d10s for percentile dice hanging out, but this is a beginner game. It's actually intended for people who haven't even, it describes what a role-playing game is, right? It's for beginners who may not ever have played a role-playing game before, and yet it doesn't actually include dice for percentile rolls. It's weird. I think the dice are really interesting, and that was one of the things that I think really drew me to play through the Star Wars role-playing, is that the narrative aspects of those dice, where you can succeed but have bad effects that follow on, and you can fail but have good effects that follow on, and you can have triumphs and critical fails, and then also that it has the ability to add in force, light side and dark side. So the interplay of those is really something that's interesting, and I described it, I think, in one of the early videos, but it seemed like a more nuanced version of the I think is it from Mythic, but the way in which a solo role playing, you get yes and yes but, no and no but, sort of spread of answering yes and no questions as you go through a solitary role-playing game. And it seemed to me like these narrative dice really provided an interesting way to do that. And it kind of plays out. It is interesting. It becomes a little bit of a struggle sometimes to decide how to spend advantage or threat or triumph. And gosh, did I get any of the critical fails? I don't think I did, but as I was playing through this, but so that was really something that's interesting, and I'm looking forward to doing that. And then thematically, it really fits in with Star Wars, with that whole hidden fortress kind of, you know, every failure actually really just advances the plot. Um, and that actually came out in the adventure in a couple places where it was pretty clear that this was a major part of this actual role playing experience, was that and you can fail but succeed. Getting into, you know, an impossible situation is sometimes the best way to move forward, in and the most epic way, because you succeed and you get over that insane situation. uh, some of the I liked how they described the symbols that are used on the dice, but some of the choices are really kind of bizarre, and I think they could have been better. It seems like the dice for the Genesis system, the symbols are a little bit more rational, but um, they're like the success symbol on the Star Wars dice is like this wonky explosion, like lopsided, non-symmetrical explosion, and it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with Star Wars at all. Like, it could have been the light side star, um, whereas, you know, the failure is that sort of inverted triangle that is familiar if you've played any of the Knights of the Old Republic stuff. Um, but the success was not the light side star from that, and it just doesn't seem like it comes from anywhere, as far as the actual Star Wars, you know, theme. So I don't know. The advantage symbol is almost the Jedi symbol. It's got the wings and a little dot, but it doesn't have that, you know, the central neck of the kind of the phoenix look, and it seemed like maybe like it could have been an X-wing canopy, like how the threat is like a TIE fighter window. I don't know. Anyhow, something else. Something they could have done better at being more Star Warsy, on the symbols, and they could have been less arbitrary, I think. Um, in the set, for the beginner's game, the flip side of the map is a huge galaxy map, and it's really a duplicate of a map that's included in, I think, Edge of the Empire and one of the other books. I think, Age of Rebellion. I think it might actually just be exactly duplicated. It's just filler. It's not used in the game at all. And so I feel like they could have, they had a whole other side of this map. They could have done something interesting with it, instead of just adding this galaxy map that had been printed somewhere else, in the other books. The other thing it might have been, nice to have included would be a play mat for, like, with the range bands. The range bands, it's really cool how, both, individual combat and also space combat are on that grid. And I created a sort of a range band graphic to use, in my playthrough. But it would have been nice, I think, instead of that galaxy map, they could have included a range band thing. Or, put the galaxy map on one half of the back and then have the other half of the back be a range band playmat. The other thing that I noticed, and it appears to be true for all of the beginner games, is that they all ask you to start the players with 2 strain, to represent, the events that happened before the beginner game. But in the actual rule books, for the full game, it talks about how players should start out fresh, without any strain at the beginning of their adventures. They should, be healed up and have their strain reduced before the beginning of each adventure. So I found that to be kind of contradictory, and it seems like if you have to start an adventure with strain, then you've somehow misbalanced the game design. Like you're making an arbitrary choice to apply a penalty at the beginning of a game, which should be included somehow in the game design, instead of having to nerf it at the beginning. That just seemed weird, that kind of aspect. At some level, I suppose that it is intended to represent that, the story had something that happened before it. But in function, it just seemed weird to just sort of arbitrarily nerf your players at the beginning. And it's only 2 strain, so who cares? It's like they should have just started and not bothered with it. Or else narratively included that in the beginning somehow. The I found the terminology for players, player character, hero player, and game master to be bizarre and overly complicated. Like there's like at least an extra layer above of extra terminology that they could have collapsed down and just been a lot clearer and less awkward about. It seems like they're trying to get away from PC, NPC, GM kind of thing. But talking about all of the players being the hero players and the game master is just kind of weird. And then you talk about player characters still. I don't know. It seemed overly complicated, and they could have smoothed out that terminology without it being awkward. Now, the other thing, of course, is that I did this as a solo player. Right? So I adapted the rules, or, adapted my play session to deal with the fact that I was playing everything. The box itself says 3 to 5 players, but I don't understand why. Okay, they don't want to make it a solo game, right? But why not 2? Why not a GM and 1 hero player? Why make it 3 to 5? That just seems weird. It could have been 2 to 5. There's no reason why you couldn't play this with just 2 people and have 1 be the GM and 1 be the player. And in fact, as I went through, it really worked out okay as being a solo player. I mean, obviously it's different because I'm sort of a lot more narrative in it, and I, have to sort of sequester some knowledge, which I do successfully sometimes and other times not. But certainly there's no reason why it needs to be 3 players. It could have been 2 to 5 players. Another thing that I've noticed is kind of outside this set is, as I've been looking at the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars line, the entire time that I've been playing this game and recording it, like over the course of a couple months, massive portions of the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars stuff have been out of stock. They've been, waiting for the printer. They've been on the boat. They've been, waiting to go. But this entire time, it's been out of stock. This is like a weird marketing strategy thing. I don't understand how this works. Like, is it intentional that Fantasy Flight Games is creating this like usurious aftermarket scalping of things? I've seen bits of the Star Wars stuff that was coming back into stock at like twice the price, the list price, on offer. It's just nuts. Like, it's obvious that some people are buying up a bunch of it and then reselling it because they know that big chunks of this are going to be out of stock for months at a time. And so it rubs me wrong that, to get like all of the rule sets, it's like a grand, $1,000 to get, all the rule books. If you get all the little expansions, and then they do it 3 times for each of the, the Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. And then each one has 6 expansion books for, the 6 main classes, and then each one has adventure books that are included. And each of those books has, races, species, and equipment, and, additional rules that are different and can be used, but they also include like a third or more of each of the core rule books is duplicated across each other. It just makes me, it seems wrong, both like in its plain old, even if it were all in stock all the time, having a game where in order to get all of the rules to play it out, you have to spend $1,000 and there's duplication across each of the 3 little lines. But then on top of that, where this in stock, out of stock thing results in this boom bust cycle where people are scalping and overcharging for the material, I find it all really weird. Plus, let's put this into perspective. I was filming this over the holiday season, so I started before the Christmas holiday rush, and this shit was all out of stock. Excuse my French, but what the hell? They didn't even have it in stock for Christmas? That's weird. Just weird. Okay, so enough of that little rant. Back to the actual adventure. One of the things that I noticed as I was playing through is that the encounters are really uneven in length. There were some that were, as I was filming them, there was, some that took an hour and some that took 10 minutes, 15 minutes to go through. The writing of the encounters was very uneven, and it seemed like those could have been either have the brief ones fleshed out a little bit more, or combined with the other ones. And then another thing that happened, if you watch through the videos, you'll notice that the Force Awakens thing about this entire beginner's game is super easy to skip. In fact, as I was playing through it, my character, my pilot, was able to escape from the Star Destroyer and skip the last major encounter, which had the Force Awakens feel to it. The encounter on the Star Destroyer with Captain Phasma. And so I ended up, sort of retroactively doubling that encounter, so that my pilot couldn't escape the second time, in order so that I could play that part. That was kind of weird. On that one successful check, I managed to skip the whole First Order encounter, which was a major part of the beginner game, and had the most feel from the movie. Uneven encounter lengths, and also part of it's on rails, but then this part was so off the rails that I ended up having to cheese my players in order to actually play it. But overall, it was fun. It was interesting, and it was fun to try and play as a solo. And I felt that it really had that Hidden Fortress feelings, where complications and that the principle that failure can actually advance the plot was built into the narrative and to the story. So overall, it was a good experience. I'm kind of interested in both doing the other beginner game that I've got, which is Age of Rebellion, and then also doing the add-on adventure, the downloadable add-on adventure to this one, as another sets of videos. And so that's really my thoughts as I wrap up the Star Wars role-playing The Force Awakens beginner game. And I hope you enjoyed the videos. And if not, then sorry. That's just a failure I will have to overcome. All right. Thanks. Thanks for watching. Bye.